Hello, and welcome to the presentation on kin recognition. Today we will be asking how do we recognize kin, and why is it important to do so? We previously discussed Hamilton's rule and kin selection, which tell us that in some cases it is important to recognize kin in order to direct helping behavior towards them. But there is a cultural fascination with another aspect of kin recognition, and that is who not to boink. We might take it for granted that we recognize our kin, but the popularity of versions of the myth of Oedipus show us that we are concerned about having kin we don't recognize and how we might interact with them. In real life, as in pop culture, there are many instances of people meeting siblings, parents, and cousins as adults and feeling sexual attraction for them when these individuals aren't recognized as kin. There are four primary mechanisms that individuals use, and in keeping with Sarah Hrdy, we're going to examine these through the eyes of a baby. So one mechanism that infants and people alike can use to recognize kin are visual cues. This is a picture of my sister with my nephew, her son, who's 3 months old, and there's very obviously a visual recognition of kin in this picture. And starting at about 2 weeks old, infants can preferentially pick out pictures and videos of mom compared to strangers. So there are visual cues that infants can use. We also use auditory cues to identify kin, mostly the sounds of voices. So when fetuses are played recordings of their parents' voices, mom's or dad's voices, the heart rate slows, which indicates relaxation when they recognize the voice of a kin. This doesn't occur when they're played recordings of any voices, only their parents. And when you put little speakers on each breast of a lactating mother, infants will preferentially choose to suckle at the nipple playing the recording of a parent's voice, either mom's or dad's, versus a stranger. So these indicate to us that there is some preference for parents' voices, which means that the infant or the fetus can recognize the parents' voices as compared to strangers. We also use olfactory cues. Very, very young infants, just 3 to 6 days old, were placed next to breast pads from their nursing mom or placed next to a breast pad from a stranger, and they were much more likely to relax when they were placed next to the scent of their lactating mother. This didn't occur when the infant was bottle fed or when they were presented with odors from dad or strangers, so they're recognizing the smell of breastfeeding from mom. And this is a picture of Sarah Hrdy with her own first child, nestled up under the nose, cueing into each other's scents just a few days after birth. But mostly kin recognition is really about who you spend time near growing up with, and this means like a lot of time together. This is a really good mechanism for recognizing kin because the people who you are most likely to spend a lot of time around as a young child are members of your close family. And this is known as, well, and this produces results such as disgust towards close relatives, which is known as the Westermarck effect. Westermarck remarked in 1895 that there is a remarkable absence of erotic feelings between people living closely together since childhood. And this is some data from Arthur Wolf's study of Taiwanese minor marriages. These are marriages where the wife was married into the house at, in some cases, very young ages. So we can look at the age of the wife's first association. So this goes from infancy up to 14 years old on this graph. So those are years in age. This is when she was adopted into her husband's family house. And on the y-axis, we have general fertility. So we see as wife's age at first association increases, so does fertility. And there is the same effect for either wife's age or husband's age at first affiliation on divorce rate and extramarital affairs. So the younger the wife was married into the house, or the younger the husband was when the wife was married into the house, the less likely they were to have children, the more likely they were to divorce, and the more likely they were to have extramarital affairs. And the hypothesis is that when they're associating at very young ages, they're cueing into the other person as kin. And when you cue into someone as kin, you don't have a desire to have sex with them. And this is known as incest avoidance. The fact that people are not sexually attracted to those whom they recognize as kin. Why bother avoiding having sex with kin? Well, when you have offspring with non-relatives or distant relatives, it actually increases the genetic variation of your offspring, because they're getting your genes and they're getting someone else's genes, which are altogether different from yours in many cases. They're not getting your genes and your sibling. Your sibling shares half of your genes, so they're just getting a lot of your genes. This leads us to the question, why have sex at all? So let's think this problem logically through. If you have sex with a sibling, then your offspring have less genetic variation because they're getting essentially 75% of your genes. If you have sex with an identical twin, it's like having sex with yourself. This would be great. All of your genes get passed on, but we see this happening very rarely. Why not just clone yourself if you're thinking about having sex with someone closely related to you? Coral clone themselves. This is a successful strategy in some cases, but overall clones lack variation to defend themselves from things like diseases. So the less variation that your offspring have, the less likely they are to respond to things that can mutate and evolve much more quickly than humans, like bacteria. You also don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket, shall we say. You don't want all of your offspring susceptible to the same problems. It's like having a monoculture in a field. If all of the corn is genetically identical, the same disease can come through and wipe out all of that corn. The more genetic variation there is in the field, the more likely that when pests and diseases come through, there will be some left standing. So if you're interested in this topic, there's a great PBS documentary on why sex. I suggest you take a look at it or email me. I'm happy to tell you about the documentary. But to wrap up this presentation, kin recognition is useful for identifying whom to help, and hopefully by this point you understand Hamilton's rule and kin selection, and also in identifying whom to avoid mating with. And I hope you also understand the principles of incest avoidance, why we have sex, and the Westermarck effect. Thanks for listening.